Did you know that historically, across the globe and throughout time, one of the most oppressed people groups actually has been women? Yeah. Now, we're not here to make a women's lib movement, but I do feel like it is a beautiful thing when we begin to uncover exactly what it is that God says about us. Because listen, God is not into oppression. He is into freedom and liberation. And the things we're going to uncover in today's episode with Hannah Conway, a previous guest, historian and theologian, but she's fun and exciting. I know those things sound like she might be boring. She is not boring. We have a really good time. She uncovers what exactly God says in the Word about women so that you can feel the freedom in your soul to take up space, be exactly who you are, whether that's in your family, in your relationships, even in your church and in your community. And spoiler, one of the words God uses to describe you as a woman, He only uses for Himself and women. Yep, pretty exciting. You're pretty important. And so the rest of what God says about us is even more cool. So we're going to dive in. It's going to be great. Let's go.
Hi, you're listening to Java with Jen with your host, Jenna Lee Samuel. On this show, I bring the simplicity of hearing God's voice into everyday life in a no-nonsense, authentic, and super practical way. With coffee in hand and real life in our faces, let's do this. Everybody, thanks so much for joining me for another episode here at Java with Jen. I have a sweet, special, beautiful, wonderful guest with me, Hannah Conway, who is, it feels like when we talk, like we're besties from childhood because I don't know, I just connect with her. And so she has actually been on the show before and we had a really great time. And during that episode, we talked a little bit and I was like, girl, we got to open that can of worms in another episode. And we talked a little bit about what the Bible says about women and specifically the phrase Ezer Kenegdo, right? Did I say? Kenegdo, whatever.
So
I
close,
can't say.
so close.
So close. And so I wanted Hannah to come on and talk about that because she has a degree in history. And Hannah, you can share with us a little bit more about what led you to the insights of this. But first of all, welcome and thank you for coming back.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, we have the best time chatting. I completely agree with you. It feels like we just connect and hit it off, and we've been friends since childhood, and we could literally talk hours.
We could. It's true. It's dangerous, actually.
It is so dangerous. It is so dangerous.
Okay, so in our last episode, we talked about how Hannah plays a really beautiful role in a very unsuspecting denomination, training women how to be leaders and do ministry. And in her denomination, historically, it hasn't been that open to women in those roles. And so the irony of it, I just love. And so you'll have to check out Hannah's other episode, and I'll try to track it down while you're talking so I can give everyone the number of it. But it wasn't too long ago, just a few weeks ago. But because of that, Hannah has done a lot of research and a lot of digging into, well, what does the Bible actually say about our role as women and the role that we can play biblically? Because of course we want to be biblical. And she has come to discover that the things God says about us are so much more empowering and beautiful and freeing and liberating than we have been taught or then maybe we assumed or realized. And so Hannah, why don't you give us a little bit of background of yourself for those who didn't catch the other episode, and then let us know, like, how did you get into that place of discovery specifically about Ezer Kenegdo?
Oh, girl, this is so fun. This is a fun story. So I am I'm an author, I'm a speaker. I am a women's ministry director and communication director at our church. So all things social media communications, it's a fun world. An army wife, and I've got 3 kids, 2 grown, 1 still at home. And I have a history degree. I was a history teacher for several years. I am truly nerdy at the core. Like I would be a professional college student. Like I would just go to school. I love to learn, and I love to teach. Like it is fun. It's fun for me. And anything that I learn, I do my best to pass it on. But from a young age, I felt a call to ministry. But being in the denomination that I was in, I truly didn't think that was for me. Like there must have been something wrong with that calling, because did he call girls? Did he call women? I wasn't sure. I didn't see any women represented in the area that I was in. And so I truly I truly thought and heard, you kind of catch worse caught than taught,
Yeah.
that I could be a pastor's wife or I could be a missionary. And so
Mhm.
those were the two things that I thought. And I was like, ah. And eventually, I discovered that your calling is to love God and love people, and everyone is on mission. And so I kind of embraced this life on mission mentality, which I'm a huge, like, I'm like, yes, this is what we're supposed to be doing, whatever you're doing.
Uh-huh.
But later it just continued to be this tug. It was like,
Mm.
there's more. And I was like, what do you mean there's more? Like, I'm doing what I think I'm supposed to be doing. And eventually, in 2019, I was still teaching. I was in the classroom. I was a middle school teacher, and I was already writing. So I was like, God, I'm living on mission. What else do you want from me?
Mm.
And it was very much like, I'm supposed to be in vocational ministry.
Wow.
And I didn't know what to do with that. And so I saw a need in our church. I saw a need for women's ministry. I saw a need for communications and media stuff, which I'd been doing in the author world. And so I was like, I can see where this can benefit the church and
Mhm.
their message. And so I put a proposal together, took it to our pastor, and he I had to wait kind of 3 years, but eventually he brought me he brought me on when they were able, and I came on. Literally, it was like, so that was like 2016. I submitted the proposal. 2019,
Uh-huh.
um, I knew I needed to step out, whether my church hired me or not.
Mm.
And by the end of that May of 2019, I stepped out of the classroom and just went out on faith. Was hired in August. Um, Part-time, and then 2020 hit, and so it was like, I'm so glad that God brought me on in time to help with communications and media and stuff like that,
Mhm.
with all that. But yeah, that's what it looked like. But as I came on staff, I work with 8 pastors, 8 male pastors, and working with the guys, it was just, they are wonderful and I love them, and they've been nothing but my biggest champions.
Aw.
But it's peculiar to be the only woman. And so I didn't quite know where I fit. I didn't know any other women in ministry. And so I just started asking questions like, God, what do you say about us as women? What do you say about us as like women in ministry? Like, what in the world? And
Yeah.
I just started digging, and I had taught history. I knew about the early church history, but what I noticed was, like, where are the women? Like, what's
Yeah.
going on? And after digging, they're there. There's
Wow.
like hundreds of years of history of
Mm.
women in ministry, and they've been lost to time, essentially. So anyway, digging in and learning about their stories, I just felt a connection,
Mm.
and seeing how Jesus interacted with women in in the Bible is beautiful. And so in our culture, we read over these stories, like the woman at the well and Mary and
Mm.
Martha, and even his own mama, the way he interacted with her was so precious. We read over them in our culture and don't really pause, but they're super significant to the
Mhm.
Hebrew people, the original audience listening. They would have been like, what is Jesus doing? And
Mm.
so learning that, like learning about the Jewish culture in the first century, the world that Jesus was born into, really rocked my world. And there were a couple of studies that the questions that I asked God, like, what do you say about us women in ministry? And he just gave me resources that
Mhm.
helped. He just led me to these resources that helped me. And one of them was a study by Christy McClellan, who I'm telling you, I'm her biggest fan. I love her. She's a professor. She's a biblical culturalist. And she wrote a study called Jesus and Women,
Mhm.
and it changed my life. And she teaches the Bible from the first century Jewish perspective.
Mhm.
And I respected her as, I would call her a historian, as a highly educated woman, as a woman who loves culture and history, who's also a teacher, a professor. I'm like, I speak that language. And
Uh-huh.
it blew my mind. And so then I start reading. I showed you before we hit record, I have all these
Uh-huh.
books. I'm like, if
Uh-huh.
anyone wants to know more, here are these books.
Uh-huh.
And I couldn't stop reading and studying. And what I found was, this freed me in a way. Like, I was 37 years old before I knew what God really said about me.
Wow.
And I knew some things, like I knew my identity in Christ, but like as a woman, what did he say as a woman in ministry, as a woman who he made in his image and called and commissioned? And once I learned it, I was like, oh man, it just set me on fire. And so anytime I have the opportunity to speak to women, teach women, any of the leadership training that I do, I'm always like, first and foremost, let's talk about who God is and his definition of himself, because you need to know who he is. And knowing who he is, he will help you know who you are. And then we need to talk about the first two words that God calls you, and that is helper, suitable, ezer kenegdo, because it means like it's insane. So that is how that journey started. And I'm pumped.
Okay, so well, we're gonna get into what are some of those things that he says.
Yes.
But first of all, you mentioned earlier before we hit record that one question you get is, how come we're just now learning this? And you made some really valuable points when you were describing that, and I feel like it lays a good foundation for women hearing what you're sharing.
Yeah. So I do. And these questions come from men and women. Like, why is this information new? Why are we just now learning this? And I'm like, okay, I hear you. I can understand why you might be skeptical of, I've never heard this. But the truth is, every translation, every version of the Bible is a translation. And the people who were interpreting it were, because many of them were obviously gone, they were doing their best to use the words that they had to express the meaning of these words in another language. And so things get lost in translation. And they'll say, well, the Bible says this is, and I'll be like, absolutely, the Bible says this, but what it says and what it means might be different because of culture, because of expressions. And one of the examples that I gave you was, if I said I killed 2 birds with 1 stone, and I wrote that down, and someone finds it 1,000 years from now, and they read that, like, if we don't know the culture behind that, the expression behind it, right? It's an idiom. It doesn't mean that I actually killed 2 birds with 1 stone.
Right.
And so
they'll think you're a mighty warrior,
that's right,
not witty or something.
That's right. And so we see that if we don't understand the Jewish idioms and the culture, we miss out on that. And so the Hebrew language, the way I was taught and explained, is it works like a suitcase, that one word can mean many things. And you have to look at the context, and you look at the culture and what's happening to get a really good understanding of what that is. So, and then another thing I would say is, so for the first time that I'm aware of in history, is women have more time to study these topics, to study these issues. And for centuries, I would even say millennia, women weren't afforded an education for the most part. They just weren't. If they were, it was limited. And so what they were taught was, well, this is what it says, this is what it must mean, and then you move on. And even before we hit record, I was like, I'm not trying to be sexist or point any malicious intent out, but not a lot of scholarly effort has been focused on the subject of women, of what God says about women. It's been like, oh, this is what it says, move on. But what does it mean, right? And so as a woman, and the men who were studying this, honestly, there was probably no malicious intent. It was just like, it doesn't have to do with me, and they move on, right? And so now, for the first time, women are like, well, I want to see what it says. And they're taking the time to look and read and compare it to other documents of the time and what was happening culturally, and different archaeological things that have been found that have brought light to some of the verses that truly confuse us. And that's what's happening. So none of this is new. It's always been there. It's just like it's been uncovered, like an archaeological dig.
No, you're right. No, you're right. We do. And because you'd mentioned how we have so many more educated women who can take the initiative to do the researching and because like my husband, for example, if I watch a guy movie, it just does not hit me like watching a chick flick will, right? And vice versa. And it's like I will draw out different things from that chick flick than he will draw out because we're looking at it through different lenses and it hits different, right? And so it's the same thing. I had a friend years ago who was from another culture, and when we would conversate, I didn't realize how many idioms I would use in communication until he would be like, what does that mean? Or he would I didn't know he was spending a lot of time on Google in our conversations because he was trying to figure out what I was talking about because English was not his first language. But then sometimes he would communicate with me and use like an idiom or just a phrase from his culture, and it would be offensive. And I would be like, wait a second. I don't think he means it offensively. What do you mean by that? And so I would have to dig in and say, and he was from the East too. And so I would have to be like, okay, what does that phrase mean in your culture? Because this is what it means in my culture. And he would be like, oh no, that's not what I'm saying. And so I feel like that's such a literal picture of the Bible and understanding the culture, the language, the phraseology. Like one of the comments that Paul makes in the New Testament, the punctuation didn't translate, but the punctuation indicated sarcasm when he was talking about women. And it created, like, we interpreted it totally backwards simply because that punctuation didn't translate. And so things like that, like if you've ever been in that kind of a situation where there's a language barrier, remember that happens with the scriptures, and it's really kind of a dangerous thing to look at scripture and just take it straight out at face value, because that's the same thing as talking to someone from another culture and taking everything they say at face value.
Right. And when we talk about studying the Bible, one of the things that I have learned, and I didn't learn this until I was an adult, when you study, you want to know who's the original audience, like the author, who wrote this book and who did they write it to? Because you want to know that original audience. You want to know what's going on. Take a look around the culture. And I like to grab, like, again, I'm a geek nerd to the core. I like to look at historically what's going on around there. Anything else I need to know culturally about what's happening. And then I look, maybe themes of the book and how it fits in the meta narrative, or the one story of the Bible that it's telling, and hold those things as I read. And that helps us to get a better interpretation, right? Because we all come to the Bible reading with our own, I don't know, our own bias, our own whatever. And so if we can hold these lenses, our own experiences, I guess would be a better way of saying that. But if we can have those lenses in mind, that frame of reference as we read it, it helps, right, to understand, get a better understanding of what's going on. And it's just, it's beautiful. It is beautiful.
Okay, so speaking of beautiful, it was beautiful when God made women, and that is where the word ezer kenegdo comes in. And so, because some people don't even know, they're like, where'd they whip that word out of? Like, where's that from? That's the original. That's the original Hebrew that speaks to women. The word women. So read where it comes from, define it for us, and let's dive into the juicy goodness.
Yeah. So I'm gonna pull it up right now, and let's see here. Okay, so it's Genesis 2:18. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper or helper suitable who is just right for him." And so it's ezer kenegdo, and ezer means helper, and kenegdo would be the suitable part. And we'll dive into that, but they're two words put together to mean this one, more than one beautiful thing. But the word ezer, it does mean helper, but in our culture, when we say helper, it means something very different than in their culture, than the original audience's culture. And so ours, if we say helper, you might think of a lesser than role, like it's you're not necessary, you're just helping me, almost like a little kid. I can let them help me in the kitchen, right? I don't really need them. And that's the kind of connotation the word helper has in our culture, but that is not what the word is. And so the word actually has this connotation of strength, of a military type word. And so it means to give strength and aid or rescue to someone who cannot do it for themselves. And so
Wait, let's
yeah,
have a moment of silence for that because wow, that's so good. And every wife of every man, I think, is like, I see it. I
I
see
see
it.
it. Yeah. So it is literally like, so whereas helper, if we're like, I'm using my hands here. If we have hands side by side, so Ezer is like side by side, but in our culture, helper, it puts that role below.
Mhm.
And that's not the case. Ezer is side by side, aiding, strengthening, rescuing in a way that the other cannot do for themselves.
Wow.
And the first word, I just get chills thinking about this. The first word that God uses to describe a woman is Ezer, and he himself calls himself an Ezer.
Wow.
And I, how much honor is there in that? And we have to understand too, like in this world, in this culture, in this day and time, women were not valued. They were not seen equal to men. If you go back and look historically at the teachings of women, there were thoughts that we were like undercooked. Like we were not, we were a deformed version of a man. We were
Oh,
not
Lord.
whole, and it was taught that we were not capable, like we were not smart, we weren't capable of learning as much. And so this is the frame of reference um that we need to keep in mind when we read this. So for
Wow.
God to come in and say something very different from culture, he is saying she's an Ezer and I am also an Ezer. So the same, like that same kind of strength, that necessariness. He called us that. He's saying something very different than what the culture is saying.
Wow.
It's beautiful. And so you can look up like the famous scriptures, I look up to the mountains, where does my help come from? Where does my Ezer come from? And so when you are looking at scriptures and God, you see the word help, it's Ezer. When God is being an Ezer or helper to Israel, he's saving her, rescuing her in a way that she cannot do for herself.
Wow.
And it's beautiful.
Wow.
And so I also want to say that Ezer Kenegdo, it is our verb, it's our function in all of our relationships. It's not just the man-wife relationship, it's how we show up in our life, in all relationships, and siblings and coworkers and aunts and uncles. It's what we do. It's not what we look like. This is how we are to function in all areas of our life and our relationship. And so the first word that God uses is Ezer. It's a word he uses to describe himself.
Wow.
And it is like, that should just be enough. That should be enough. That should be enough. But it's he goes further because he's just good like that. So Kenegdo is the next word, and it is only found one time in the Bible. And so when a word is only found one time in the Bible, like it's called a hapax legomena. I think I'm saying that right.
It's like the
found,
law of first.
it's like, yep, like one time. And so scholars had to go to outside sources that would have been written at that time to figure out, what is this word and what does it mean? And so where Ezer has this depiction of side by side, aiding, rescuing, strengthening in a way the other can't do for themselves, Kenegdo has this spirit of like holding accountable, like standing in front of someone, not letting them go whatever way they want to go, but like, I'm going to ask hard questions. I'm going to hold you accountable. And so Ezer Kenegdo is like side by side and face to face. And I'm like, as a woman, as a wife, as a mother, as a former teacher, like I'm looking at the different ways in my life, that the places that I show up and do life with others. I'm like, oh my gosh,
that makes so much sense.
It makes so much sense. And so Christy McClellan, who I talked about earlier, who first heard her teach on this, and it shook me. It shook me. She just makes a point. She's like, you might find that you are better at one than the other. Like, you might find that you're a better Ezer than you are a Connecto. Like, which one comes more natural? And I was like, I think I'm a better Ezer, but I have those moments where it's like, we're Connectoing.
Yes. I'm over here. You guys can't see me because you don't see the video, but I'm over here almost laughing hysterically because I'm thinking over my last week with my husband and how I have literally stood in his face and called him on the carpet and been like, I don't think so, and he's like, my wife he said it on Sunday. He was like, my wife doesn't let me slide on anything. And I'm like, right, because I'm holding you to what you're capable of being.
That's right. You are being a Connecto. You are being his Ezer Connecto. And that is what we are. Like, it's our function. And I'm telling you, like, when I learned that, first of all, I sat in my car and I cried for a hot minute. Like, it just overwhelmed me. So I've been asking God, like, right? Like, I've been asking God, okay, are you sure you called me in a ministry? I'm a woman. Did you know that? Like, are you sure? I don't know if I'm allowed to do that. Like, are you sure? And then what do you say about us? Like, help me learn what you say and where you want me to go. And he answered it in just this way that overwhelmed me.
Wow.
And it was so good. And I mean, I was 37 when I learned this, and I will never forget it. And then the women who I've been able to help teach this to, they have come to me with tears. They have come and they're like, we never knew. Why are we just now knowing this? Like, why am I just now hearing this? One of them was 65, and she was like, Hannah, I am 65 years old, and I'm just now hearing this. And it broke my heart. Like, it broke my heart. And I remember not long after learning it set a fire underneath me. I'm sure everyone was tired of hearing me talk about it. I was like, I don't think you understand. Like, I don't think you understand what a big deal this is. But I was hanging out. We had a staff meeting, and I was talking with some of the pastors, that I work with, and I was telling them about this. And I was like, do you all know this? And several of them were like, yeah. And I was like,
why didn't you teach us this?
Why? Like, why have you not said anything? And truly, like, I love these men. There was no malicious intent. It was like,
it just didn't resonate. It didn't resonate for them.
It didn't. They were just like, it did not occur to them. And I was like, okay. It's like, all right.
I have a job to do.
I do. And seriously, everywhere I go, I'm like, legit, we're going to talk about who God is, because you got to know that first, and what he says about himself, so you can know whose you are, who you belong to, and then what he says about you. We're going to start as women with Ezer Connecto, the first two words, and we're going to start there. Okay,
so in my brain, I'm thinking back through my life, moments, especially with my husband. Okay, for one, I like that the Connecto thing is there, because I always wondered why, when I would meet all these couples and these men would say, I love my wife, she's made me a better man. They always say it. And I'm like, hold on, why do so many men say that? And why don't you hear women say it? Why don't you hear women say, he's made me a better woman? And maybe they do sometimes, but I far more hear it from a man than I do from a woman. And I'm like, okay, why is that a thing? And how exactly is it that she's making you a better man? Because from what I see, a lot of women are like, I don't think so, buddy. Like, we don't let him slide, right? And so I was thinking back through my marriage, and there was years of my marriage that I think I was supposed to be operating as a Connecto, calling my husband into better. But I thought I had a twisted idea of what submission looked like.
Yeah.
And I tolerated what I should have been confronting, because I thought I was being submissive. I had a wrong understanding of my role as a woman, and I had in relationship to my husband. And so I took this unhealthy submission that looked like no boundaries. It looked like I was afraid to speak strongly to my husband because I thought I'm not being submitted. I thought I was supposed to just turn the other cheek and do nothing. The Lord will fight for you. And
Right.
I was abandoning my Kenedgo role,
That's
because
right.
when I started walking in boundaries and speaking up and Kenedgo and not letting him slide on stuff, his character started changing and he started rising to the challenge and
Yeah.
becoming the man that I knew was inside of him, but wasn't being demonstrated to that point.
Yeah. 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 And you can see that like these work because again, every interpretation is a translation, and our understanding of a word now is going to be something very different. Not always, but it will be different than what it originally meant. Right. And so when we do say submit, that there's a Paul is not talking about the way that we think, where it is just like being a doormat, no boundaries. That is not, and actually it's mutual submission.
Yeah.
It's we submit to one another. um but that's a whole other conversation. But yes, our role is as an Ezra Kenegdo, it is to be there side by side, aiding, strengthening, rescuing in a way they cannot do for themselves in all relationships of our life. And then Kenegdo face to face, holding accountable, asking hard questions, not letting them want to go, not being, a big jerk, because we're doing this in love, but it's side by side and face to face. And
Yeah.
when you know that, like when you're able to rightly see how God made you to function in all areas, like in all relationships, it just frees you to be like, oh, and those scriptures that seem to tell women to be quiet or to submit or whatever, you're like, how do I hold these two things together? How do I, this doesn't make sense. So you start looking at those other words and you're like, oh, there's some cultural things going on here that I need to hold and take in consideration. There's something else going on here as well. So it's been a long journey. I will have been in this position where I'm at church almost 5 years, which is crazy. And so it's been almost a 5-year journey of research, uncovering, and sharing at every opportunity that I can get.
That's so good. Okay, for one, I just want to say, you guys, you're not looking at her beautiful face, but there's no way this woman has 2 grown children. I'm just saying. She looks like she's barely 30. So you got that glow thing going, girl.
Thank you.
Must be because you know who you are.
Oh,
Okay, so tell me then, because I know a lot of women here, they're going to be trying to, what's the word? Appropriate
right.
what you're describing
It's
into
a
their
lot.
life. So what are some practical ways that maybe how did it shift change in your life, as far as really practical? Like, how did your daily life look different, or how do you hear from women that their daily life changes when they get this revelation?
Yeah.
Or maybe what are things that we do naturally walk in that we've shamed ourselves for that
Yes.
actually are part of us walking in that role? Give us some practicals.
Oh my gosh. I will say, I know this may sound silly. I felt like I could breathe deeper. Like I know that like I'd had this weight on me, like this, I don't even know. It's a burden, just heavy shoulders. And it was like God just took it off, unlocked something in me. And so honestly, the way I showed up, and I'll say this because I know that every different denomination is probably listening to this. In our church, there's always for women, and I don't want to say always, I guess I shouldn't use those words. Many times it's like we don't know where the line is to serve. We don't know what to say, where to go, how far is too far. Like we don't have this line for us. And so women are reluctant to serve in some capacities, right? And I no longer had that. I no longer had that. And so what I have found is the women who know this, it's like they hold their head up, they know who they are, who God has created them to be, and it's like they're serving with this new found freedom and joy, right? Because we carry this as women. Again, I will not speak for all women. For me and for many women in our area, it was like we carried this shame of I'm a woman. I'm less than. I'm not able to serve in capacities. And if we're not able to be pastors, it must be because we are less than. We are shameful. We are temptresses. We are not as smart. Like all of these things that you think
Yeah.
right, that it must be, and no one else is talking about it. Right. No one's having this conversation and telling us what God actually really says. And so we just more is caught than is taught, or we just assume, and we live carrying the shame of like, I must not be able, I must not be capable, I must be less than. And the truth is not. That's not true. So I would say just practically like it just gives you the freedom to walk in your faith and in your life and to serve, like to live out your life on mission with this new sense of I'm supposed to be here.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be here. I have a seat
Yeah.
at the table. Whereas
Mm.
before it was like I felt like I was in a corner. Should I be here? And
Yeah.
now, no, not that I'm, bulldozing people, but very much like,
Yeah.
no, Jesus himself has called and commissioned to me, called and commissioned me and all women who are believers.
Yeah.
And are, we are meant to be here.
Yeah. I love that you say that, because I, as a pastor's wife, and I say pastor's wife because that rolls off the tongue easier. I'm a female pastor, but in fact, I mentioned it at staff meeting the other day. I was like, in the history of us being married and in ministry, I have felt like I've lived with a leash on me, because I constantly have to navigate the cultural norms that are in place. Even if the churches I've been at aren't anti-women in leadership,
Right.
the room still isn't quite there like it is for men,
Right.
and it's like, just look at your pulpit and take inventory. How many women preach on a Sunday in a given year? Usually it's once or twice in a whole year. That's not a very high percentage, and that doesn't exactly send me the message that I belong here.
Right. That's right. And again, like for our guys that are listening and to the guys that, I love that are my pastors, that are my friends and coworkers and co-laborers, I truly like, I don't believe there's any malintent there.
Right.
Like I know they love me and they support me. They just haven't thought about it. And they are thinking about it now, which is fabulous. It is fabulous. So I'm just seeing, practically living it out. I'm just seeing our ladies walk in. It's like you're just walking in this new freedom. That's the only thing I can say is I have no shame that I'm a woman. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm made in the image of God. I am called and commissioned, and I'm owning it and asking him to help me walk in that. And so one of the things that I'll tell you what it looked like for me, I have wanted to go to seminary since I was a teenager, legit. But I was like, I didn't think that I could do that because I was a woman. Or if I did that, like, what could I ever do with it? Like, I don't know. Or what would people think about me? Was I trying to overthrow a church and, be some, I carry that with me for so long. And, finally, like I felt, I've been writing and podcasting and speaking, and I want to continue to do it with excellence. And so I just felt this nudge of, Hannah, it's time, apply. And I applied to seminary and got in.
Wow, I
and,
love it.
and even that's crazy. I was like, they're letting me. so to walk in that, like I would not have been able to do that when I first started in ministry, because I still was like, I don't know. Now I'm like, no, I'm supposed to be here. Here I come.
Gosh, that makes all the difference. When you're supposed to be in a room, you show up differently, and anywhere in our life, if
you come prepared.
If you've been like, if you're, especially as women, if we know we're wanted. In fact, I was listening to a podcast about this woman CEO from some big Fortune 500 company, and she gave the stat. She said women are like 90% less likely or something to go after a job and to go after, like, if they don't feel qualified, they have to feel 100% qualified
Right.
to take the risk to go after it. Whereas men, if they're 50% qualified, they're like, cool, I can figure out the rest, and they just go
Yeah.
for it. And she said women are so much more likely to charge less than men if they're like speakers at an event or whatever. We
Yeah.
charge less naturally. We ask for less in the workplace. We don't push for promotions. We don't, because there's a part of us that's like waiting for an invitation.
Right.
And I don't know why that's natural to our female kind. Maybe it's because we're
Yeah.
nurturers or something, but
So I have a theory.
okay.
And I don't know. Like, again, there's nothing here. This is Hannah's writer brain. This is me.
Uh-huh.
So I think it's a product of the curse. So like when the fall happens, the earth is cursed and Adam has his punishment. And then as women, it says our child labor pains will be increased. And that our desire will be for our husband, but he will rule over us. And so and that's another thing too. Like anytime that you see, if we're not side by side and a woman is lower, whatever's going on there, that, like, to me, I'm like, that's a product of the curse.
Yeah,
That's it's not God's original intent. And so part of me thinks that us thinking that we're less than is a product of that curse of not knowing, not remembering, not seeing ourselves as side by side, face to face with man. Right. And so anytime that because I do that too. Like when somebody's like, hey, what is your speaker fee? I'm like, breathe, breathe. Right. Like I want to be like, I'm coming for free.
Right.
But no, you were right. So that is my theory. And I cannot, sit here and be like, this is the proof. But I'm like, that makes sense. It's a product of the curse. And I'm not seeing myself rightly and the way that God intended.
It's so true. It's so true. Okay. So help me understand then. I had a question. Where did it go? How's some ways, and then we'll wrap, and you can suggest maybe whatever books you want to point people to or anything like that. But maybe give 3 simple ways that women can begin to, oh wait, no, that's what I was going to say. Sorry, this was very important. Okay. So back in, remember the Marvel movie, I think it was called Endgame, when essentially it was the big guy and he was like going to destroy the whole world. He had the rings, he had all the jewels. Okay.
Yes.
And then at the end of the movie, all our superheroes, all the guys like Spider-Man and Iron Man and all those guys, they were like dying. They were dying, or they were disappearing or whatever. And you think, oh my gosh, we're losing to the bad guy. What? Our superheroes are dying. And then comes Captain Marvel. And then comes all these women superheroes show up on the scene, and they help the men and they turn the tide of the battle. When I watched that scene, my spirit jumped inside of me because I felt like it was so prophetic, not of like this women's liberation movement.
No, that's not it.
It's not it, because if you look back throughout history, and I heard Chris Ballatin say this, that throughout all of history, the most oppressed people group of all time has been women. In every culture, it has been women. And there are few little pockets where maybe like the Greeks or whatever, and maybe even over here in the West, where women have more of a voice. But throughout history, women have been degraded, women have been raped, women have been, all these different things that women have been suppressed, and
they've been ruled over, a product of the curse.
Exactly. And so, but you get this picture that women have never been able to walk out their full potential. But in God's kingdom, there is always redemption. He always has the last say, and his original design always shows up at the end.
Yes, right? He's reversing the curse.
Yes, exactly. And so when I saw that scene in the end game, I was like, this is prophetic, because I feel like in history, we're so close to the Lord's return. We can see it in everything. And I feel like there is a movement. There's a reason why we're just now discovering these things about women, because God is allowing these truths to be revealed in this time, for the women that are alive now. There's a reason he's revealing it now,
Yeah, it feels so much like he's saying, come on, girls. Like it's time.
It's your turn.
It is literally half the body of believers that it's like, they're being woke up and are like, he is moving among women in a way that I'm just like, I'm blown away. I'm blown away. Girl. So it's funny that you say the superhero thing because Chrissy McClellan, who I keep referring, and you guys will be like, she is obsessed. I am. I love her. She's just amazing. But when she is teaching on Ezra Kenegdo, she points to Wonder Woman. Like that is the picture of Ezra Kenegdo of strong, strengthening, rescuing, holding accountable. Like like that's what is going on here.
Oh, I love
and
it.
it is. Oh, girl, it's so good. And I want to point out, I know we're wrapping up. One more thing, historically speaking, that I like to kind of correct a little bit is the Proverbs 31 woman. So I know we've talked about Ezra Kenegdo, but the Proverbs 31 woman in our denomination, in our evangelical world, I don't know what it's like in everyone else's, but this woman, I used to despise her.
Me too.
Right? Like I'm like, it's been used as like this checklist or this, and that is not historically accurate. It was a praise for what women were doing already. And so at that time in history, what women were doing was mostly domestic things. But if you notice, she's also in business and she's got servants helping her. I do want to point that out.
Let's just
I'm
say
like,
that.
listen, girlfriend. But the men actually would memorize this poem and recite it to their wife on Shabbat, right? Like on Fridays. As a way to praise her and honor her. And so I've heard it said it's kind of like an ancient you go girl. And so today, if it's like, it's basically like a woman of valor. So if there's anything that you do that is noble or of valor, it's like saying you go girl and like way to go. And so that's what it is. It's just praising you for all the good things that you're doing now. And it's not a standard to live up to or live by. Like it's just praising you for what you're doing. That's awesome, right? So that was something too that was very freeing to be like, oh my goodness.
That's so good. I love that. Yes, because I resented her as well for a very long time. And then I realized, I was like, she probably did these things over a lifetime too. So there's some grace.
That's right. There's some grace here. I'm like, listen.
Listen, Linda. Okay, so Hannah, why don't you tell us how can they connect with you, and what would you say is I feel like of your 4 books, maybe we'll put those links in the show notes so they can get to them if they want, but then tell us which one is your favorite to start with.
Oh goodness. Okay, so totally connect with me through Instagram. I'm there hanging out most of the time. You can find me at hannah.conway.com, and then you can get my books basically anywhere they're sold. But the research books that I've been doing, so if you would like to further study, I would definitely recommend it's big, but you can kind of flop through it. It's Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, Cultural Studies, and Gospel. And it's by Kenneth Bailey. It's a big one. So good. So good. So you get to learn those Jewish idioms, the thing, and it just helps you just understand more. And you're like, oh my God, it's so crazy and good. And then next, I would highly recommend The Blue Parakeet by Scott McKnight. And rethinking how you read the Bible. Fantastic. And there's a whole section on on women, like women in church ministries today. And it was just very eye-opening. I would highly recommend that. And then there's Worthy, Celebrating the Value of Women by Elise Fitzpatrick and Eric, I cannot say his name, Schumacher. And then this one is my most recent that is like, what in the world? It's called Nobody's Mother. Just came out recently. It's by Sandra Glan. It's about Artemis of Ephesians. And so there are these like creepy verses that have freaked me out growing up. It was like, Paul's talking to Timothy and he's like, a woman will be saved through childbearing. And you're like, what is he talking about? Like, what's going on? And I've heard some people are like, we don't really know, or I've heard some crazy teaching on it. And this woman has done extensive research on the culture of what's going on. And Artemis is this god that we thought was the god of like fertility and maybe motherhood. And we were wrong. And it is just, girl. So like, I won't even give it away, but these books to get you started. So good. I'll send you.
What was the book that was by your favorite chick that you kept quoting?
Oh, yes, that too. Which do I have any of her books over here with me? Christy McClellan, her study, Jesus and Women. I would start there. And then she has an on class that you can purchase called Ezer Kenegdo. And it is life altering, like and life giving. It truly is. So those are my resources. I will send you those links.
Okay.
I want every woman to know about them and to have them, and the men too, like the men who are like, I want to learn more about this subject so I can help the women who are in my life.
Yeah, I'm like over here thinking, how can I brainwash my boys to,
my husband watched the Christy McClellan study. Like I would have it on kind of like playing, and he would sitting and watching it with me because it's just so good. It's just so good.
It's so good. Well, and I've got boys who are going to be looking for wives. I've got one dating and one almost dating, you know, and so I'm like, oh, y'all need to know what to be looking for. So that's so good. Okay, you should also reach out to that chick that's your favorite author, and you should see about being an affiliate for her, because I know you're going to be promoting her stuff everywhere, so you should just do that.
You're right. I should do that. I'm so excited. I was supposed to go to Israel with her in March to study for 2 weeks. And with everything happening in Israel, they pushed it back to 2025. And so I was like, okay. But I am so here for it. Like, not only do I get to go to seminary, but I get to study in Israel. Like, how fun is that?
That's amazing. I love that. Well, Hannah, thank you so much for coming back on. You're such a sweetheart. I know you have a lot to do over there scheduling out your year. And so thank you for taking the time to share with my people.
Oh, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, you guys, thanks for tuning in. And for those of you who enjoyed this, and maybe it probably more than anything just triggered some like sparks of new ideas and new things you may want to dig into, share this with a friend, share this with your husband, share it with your pastor. I don't know. You never know. And so share this out with people that you know. Thank you for tuning in. Go pop by on Instagram at Java with Jen. We can stay connected over there. I like to ask you guys questions and have conversations with y'all over there. And if you're listening on Spotify, in case you didn't realize, when you're listening to an episode, you can actually go into the app and you can leave comments, answer questions. And if I have a poll set up, you can answer a poll. So it's a fun way to interact with my episodes. You can actually leave a voice memo too. And so if you leave a voice memo, I could always pull it into other episodes. And so go check that out in Spotify. But otherwise, you guys, thanks for tuning in. Share this with a friend, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's show. Listen, let's stay connected. Come follow me on Instagram at Java with Jen, where you can follow the latest and say hey. It's a really great way to stay in touch. Many of you have also asked how you can support the show. You can make donations through the Anchor app or on Patreon, or of course by sharing, rating, and reviewing on social media and iTunes as well. Your heartfelt feedback always reminds me why I do this. Also, don't miss our merch store, where you can get super cool Java with Jen swag and coffee. Find it at javawithjenmerch.com. Until next time, remember, hearing God's voice is simple, and He wants to be a part of your everyday life. See you next week.